The police officer dropped the letter onto the metal table and stared at it. His face turned pale. For months, everyone thought inmate Daniel Brooks was simply writing letters to his family. Every week, another envelope left Blackstone Prison. Every week, another letter was mailed. Nothing seemed strange. Nothing seemed dangerous. But now, under a bright lamp inside the prison investigation room, Detective Ryan Carter finally understood the truth. The letters were not innocent. They were not even meant for Daniel's family. Hidden inside the letters was a secret code. And that code appeared to be connected to a series of crimes happening outside the prison walls. Ryan quickly flipped through the stack of letters. His heart pounded. Every page looked normal at first. Simple words. Simple stories. Simple updates about prison life. But when the letters were placed side by side, something terrifying appeared. A pattern. A message. A plan. Ryan looked at the final sentence of the newest letter and felt a chill run down his spine. Because the hidden message seemed to point to something that was about to happen in less than 24 hours. Something big. Something dangerous. Something that could change everything. He grabbed the phone and reached for it. But before he could dial, another officer burst into the room. "Detective, you need to see this right now." Ryan looked up. What happened? The officer swallowed hard. "We just got another letter from Daniel." Ryan froze. That wasn't possible. Daniel was locked inside his cell. And the mailroom had already been closed for the day. So how had another letter suddenly appeared? And who had delivered it? The answer would shock everyone. But to understand that answer, we need to go back to the beginning. 3 months earlier, Blackstone Prison sat alone on a stretch of empty land in northern Kansas. Tall fences surrounded the prison. Steel gates blocked every entrance. Security cameras watched every corner. The prison held some of the state's most dangerous criminals. Most inmates spent their days quietly. Some worked prison jobs. Some read books. Some played cards. And some simply stared through the bars of their cells. Daniel Brooks was different. At 38 years old, he was known as one of the quietest inmates in the entire prison. He never caused trouble. He never got into fights. He never argued with guards. Most days, he sat alone at a small desk inside his cell. Writing. Always writing. Morning. Afternoon. Night. The scratching sound of his pen became so common that guards barely noticed it anymore. Every Friday, Daniel handed several letters to the prison mailroom. The workers checked them like all inmate mail. Nothing unusual was ever found. The letters were sent. Life continued. At first, nobody cared. Why would they? Many inmates wrote letters. Some wrote to family. Some wrote to friends. Some wrote to people they missed. Daniel seemed no different. But Officer Mark Jensen started noticing something strange. Not in the letters. In Daniel himself. Whenever mail day arrived, Daniel became nervous. Very nervous. He constantly checked the clock. He paced his cell. He watched the hallway. Then, the moment his letters were collected, he suddenly relaxed. As if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Mark found it odd. But not odd enough to report. Still, the feeling stayed with him. Weeks passed. Then one rainy afternoon, a prison worker made an unexpected discovery. A letter had accidentally ripped open while being sorted. The worker glanced at the page inside. Nothing looked suspicious. Just normal writing. But one thing caught his attention. A single word had been circled very lightly in pencil. Almost too lightly to see. The worker showed it to his supervisor. The supervisor shrugged. Probably a mistake. The letter was mailed anyway. No one thought much about it. Until another letter arrived the following week. And this one also contained a lightly circled word. Then another. And another. Soon, Officer Mark Jensen began wondering if those circles meant something. He decided to quietly collect copies of Daniel's outgoing letters. Just to satisfy his curiosity. Nothing more. At least, that's what he told himself. Late one evening, Mark spread the copied letters across his desk. He examined every page. Every sentence. Every word. For nearly 2 hours, he found nothing. Then suddenly, he noticed something. The circled words seemed connected. Not random. Not accidental. Connected. His stomach tightened. Slowly, he wrote the circled words onto a separate sheet of paper. One after another. The message started forming. At first, it made no sense. Then it became clearer. And clearer. Until Mark finally understood what he was looking at. His eyes widened. The hidden message wasn't talking about prison life. It wasn't talking about family. It wasn't talking about friends. It was describing locations. Specific locations. Places outside the prison. Places connected to crimes that had happened only days earlier. Mark immediately reached for the phone. But before he could call anyone, an emergency alarm suddenly exploded through the prison speakers. Guards began running through the hallways. Inmates started shouting from their cells. And somewhere inside Blackstone Prison, a prisoner had just disappeared. The emergency alarm echoed through every corner of Blackstone Prison. Red lights flashed across the hallways. Guards rushed toward the cell blocks. Doors slammed shut. Officers shouted orders. For a few moments, nobody knew exactly what had happened. Officer Mark Jensen dropped the phone and ran toward cell block C. The missing inmate had been reported there only seconds earlier. As he reached the block, he saw officers crowding around a cell. The atmosphere felt tense. Everyone looked confused. Mark pushed through the group. "What's going on?" A guard pointed toward the open cell. The inmate was here during the count. Mark looked inside. The bunk was empty. The sink dripped slowly. The small desk sat untouched. But the inmate was gone. The strange thing was that the cell showed no signs of escape. The bars were intact. The locks worked perfectly. The cameras outside the cell had never stopped recording. Yet somehow, the prisoner had vanished. The missing inmate was named Tyler Grant. He was serving time for fraud and financial crimes. Nothing violent. Nothing that suggested he would attempt a risky escape. That alone made the situation even stranger. The prison immediately entered lockdown. Every inmate was counted. Every room was searched. Every hallway was checked. Hours passed. Nobody found Tyler. Then, shortly after midnight, officers discovered him. He was sitting calmly inside an unused storage room in another building. The room had been locked the entire day. No one could explain how he got there. When guards questioned him, Tyler gave only one answer. "I got lost." Nobody believed him. But they had no proof otherwise. The prison administration focused on the escape investigation. As a result, Mark's discovery about Daniel's letters was pushed aside. For a while. The next morning, Blackstone Prison returned to its usual routine. The alarms stopped. The inmates returned to work assignments. The guards resumed their patrols. Everything looked normal again. But Mark couldn't stop thinking about the hidden message. He spent his lunch break reviewing the copied letters. The more he studied them, the more suspicious they became. Some messages seemed to contain directions. Others appeared to mention dates. Several referred to locations in nearby towns. And every hidden message seemed carefully planned. This was no accident. Someone had spent a lot of time creating these codes. That afternoon, Mark finally reported his findings to Detective Ryan Carter. Ryan listened carefully. He examined the letters. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Are you sure these messages are connected?" Mark nodded. "I've checked them 3 times. Ryan looked thoughtful. "If you're right, somebody outside this prison is receiving instructions." Neither man liked that possibility. Prisons were designed to separate criminals from the outside world. But if Daniel was secretly communicating with people beyond the walls, that separation no longer existed. Ryan requested copies of every letter Daniel had mailed during the past year. The investigation officially began. Over the next week, investigators worked quietly. They didn't want Daniel to know he was being watched. Officers observed him during meals. They watched him during recreation periods. They monitored every visitor. Yet Daniel remained calm. He spent most of his time writing. Always writing. His behavior never changed. If anything, he seemed completely unaware of the investigation. Then something unusual happened. A letter arrived for Daniel. Incoming mail was routine. Inmates received letters all the time. But this envelope caught attention immediately. There was no return address, no sender name, no identifying information. Just Daniel's name written neatly on the front. Mailroom workers opened it for inspection. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Nothing else. No message. No letter. No signature. Just one sentence typed in the center of the page. The clock is moving faster. The workers reported it immediately. Detective Ryan Carter stared at the paper. The sentence sounded strange. Almost like a warning. Or perhaps a signal. Investigators questioned Daniel about it. He simply smiled. "I don't know who sent it." "Do you know what it means?" Ryan asked. Daniel shrugged. "No." The interview ended with no answers. But something about Daniel's smile bothered Ryan. It was brief. Almost invisible. Yet it seemed important. As days passed, more odd events appeared. A second anonymous letter arrived. Then a third. Each contained only a short sentence. "The road is clear. The package arrived. Everything is ready." The messages sounded harmless by themselves. But together they felt connected. Ryan became increasingly concerned. He ordered deeper analysis of Daniel's outgoing letters. Meanwhile, reports from nearby towns began reaching local police departments. Nothing dramatic. Nothing violent. Just unusual crimes. Small thefts. Fraud cases. Missing property. The cases seemed unrelated. Yet investigators noticed one disturbing detail. Several incidents occurred near locations mentioned in Daniel's hidden messages. That coincidence was becoming harder to ignore. One evening, Ryan sat alone reviewing evidence. Stacks of letters covered his desk. Maps covered the walls. Dates and locations were marked with colored pins. Then suddenly, a connection appeared. A major connection. His eyes locked onto 3 different letters. The hidden messages referenced the same location repeatedly. An abandoned warehouse outside town. Ryan immediately called a team together. The next morning, police traveled to the warehouse. The building looked empty. Broken windows covered the sides. Dust coated the floor. Silence filled the air. Officers searched every room. For nearly an hour, they found nothing. Then one officer called out, "Detective! Over here!" Ryan hurried across the building. Behind a loose wall panel, officers had discovered a hidden space. Inside were boxes. Dozens of boxes. Each one carefully labeled. Each one connected to crimes that had occurred across multiple counties. The discovery stunned everyone. Daniel's coded letters had led them directly to a secret criminal operation. But the biggest shock came seconds later. One officer opened the final box. Inside was a folder. And attached to the front was a recent photograph. A photograph taken only 3 days earlier. It showed a group of people standing together. Ryan recognized one face immediately. It wasn't a criminal on the outside. It wasn't a gang member. It wasn't an unknown suspect. It was someone who worked inside Blackstone Prison. Someone with access to Daniel every single day. And at that very moment, that person was still walking freely through the prison. The room fell silent. Detective Ryan Carter stared at the photograph in disbelief. The face in the picture belonged to Officer Kevin Turner. Kevin had worked at Blackstone Prison for nearly 7 years. He was trusted, respected, reliable. At least, that was what everyone believed. Ryan picked up the photograph and looked closer. There was no mistake. Kevin stood beside 3 unknown people outside the abandoned warehouse. The picture had been taken only 3 days earlier. That meant one thing. Someone inside Blackstone Prison was connected to Daniel Brooks. And that someone might be helping him communicate with criminals on the outside. Ryan carefully placed the photo into an evidence bag. Nobody spoke during the drive back to the prison. Everyone was thinking the same thing. How deep did this go? When Ryan arrived at Blackstone, he immediately ordered a quiet investigation. He did not want Kevin to know he was under suspicion. Not yet. If Kevin was involved, warning him could destroy months of work. For the next several days, investigators watched him closely. They reviewed security footage. They checked work schedules. They examined visitor records. At first, everything seemed normal. Kevin followed the same routine every day. He arrived on time. He completed his duties. He spoke politely with coworkers. Nothing looked suspicious. But then investigators noticed something strange. Kevin often volunteered for mailroom duties. Far more often than other officers. In fact, whenever Daniel's outgoing mail was processed, Kevin seemed to be nearby. Sometimes he helped inspect letters. Sometimes he moved mail carts. Sometimes he simply appeared in the area for no clear reason. Individually, those moments meant little. Together, they formed a troubling pattern. Ryan decided to dig deeper. One evening, investigators reviewed surveillance footage from several weeks earlier. Hour after hour, they watched recordings. Most of it was boring. Employees working. Inmates walking. Nothing unusual. Then they found it. A short clip from late one night. The mailroom was supposed to be empty, but the camera showed Kevin entering alone. He looked around carefully. Then he removed a stack of envelopes from a storage bin. For several minutes, he examined them. After that, he placed them back and left. The footage raised serious questions. Why would he inspect inmate mail after hours? And why had he never reported doing so? The next day, Ryan questioned him. Kevin appeared calm. Very calm. Why were you in the mail room that night? Ryan asked. Kevin smiled. I was helping finish paperwork. Ryan slid a printed image from the surveillance video across the table. Kevin glanced at it. His expression barely changed. I was checking inventory. At 11:47 at night. Kevin shrugged. We were behind schedule. The interview ended with no confession. No mistakes. No clear evidence. Yet Ryan felt more suspicious than ever. Meanwhile, Daniel continued writing letters. Every week, more envelopes left the prison. The investigation team copied every page. They searched for hidden messages. Most contained the same strange patterns. Circled words. Unusual punctuation. Specific phrases repeated again and again. Then analysts discovered something important. The coded messages were growing more urgent. The language had changed. The instructions seemed shorter. More direct. Almost as if something important was approaching. Ryan became increasingly worried. He believed a major event was being planned. The problem was that nobody knew what it was. Days passed. Then another surprise arrived. A package was delivered to the prison mailroom. It was addressed to Daniel Brooks. Packages for inmates were uncommon but allowed under strict rules. Workers opened it for inspection. Inside was a puzzle book. Nothing more. At first glance, it looked harmless. But one employee noticed that several pages had tiny marks beside certain puzzle numbers. The package was immediately handed over to investigators. Ryan examined the book. The marked puzzle numbers seemed random, until analysts compared them to Daniel's letters. Suddenly, the pieces fit together. The numbers matched coded references hidden throughout his correspondence. The puzzle book was not entertainment. It was a communication tool, a way to send information without attracting attention. The discovery confirmed everyone's fears. Daniel was part of something much larger. That evening, Ryan received a phone call from another police department. New evidence had been found during an unrelated fraud investigation. The evidence included handwritten notes. The notes contained the same coding style found in Daniel's letters. The same patterns. The same methods. The same system. The operation stretched far beyond one town. Far beyond one prison. And perhaps far beyond one inmate. The following morning, Ryan gathered his team. A decision had been made. Daniel Brooks would be moved to a special monitoring unit. His communications would be restricted. Every letter would receive enhanced review. The transfer was scheduled for that afternoon. At first, everything went smoothly. Guards escorted Daniel through the prison hallways. He walked calmly, quietly, as usual. Then, halfway through the transfer, Daniel suddenly stopped. He looked through a nearby window and smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a worried smile. A confident smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they already know something nobody else knows. Ryan felt a chill. "Keep moving," a guard ordered. Daniel obeyed. But before entering the new unit, he turned toward Ryan. Then he said 6 simple words. "You're already too late, detective." The hallway became silent. Ryan stared at him. "What does that mean?" Daniel's smile widened slightly, but he said nothing else. The cell door closed behind him. Hours later, investigators worked late into the night reviewing every piece of evidence. Nobody liked Daniel's warning. It felt deliberate, calculated, as if he wanted them to worry. Then, just after midnight, Ryan's phone rang. The caller was one of the analysts. Her voice sounded shaken. "Detective, we found something." Ryan sat upright. "What is it?" The newest coded message. Ryan grabbed a notebook. "Go ahead." There was a long pause. Then she spoke. The message wasn't describing a future event. Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" Another pause followed. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It describes something that has already happened." Ryan's stomach tightened. "What happened?" The analyst took a breath. Then she delivered the news. A secret review of prison records had uncovered an impossible fact. According to official documents, inmate Daniel Brooks had been inside Blackstone Prison for the past 4 years. But new evidence suggested that someone using Daniel's identity had entered the prison. And if that evidence was correct, the real Daniel Brooks might never have been in Blackstone Prison at all. Detective Ryan Carter could hardly believe what he was hearing. He stared at the report on his desk. Then he read it again. And again. The words never changed. If the evidence was correct, the man living in cell 214 for the past 4 years might not be Daniel Brooks. The entire investigation suddenly became much bigger, much stranger, and much more dangerous. Ryan immediately ordered a full review of Daniel's prison records. Every document was examined. Every photograph was checked. Every fingerprint record was pulled from storage. Investigators worked through the night. By sunrise, they had uncovered several disturbing inconsistencies. The first problem involved Daniel's intake photo. The image was old and slightly blurry. At first glance, it matched the inmate in cell 214. But after modern software enhanced the photograph, small differences appeared. The ears looked slightly different. The nose shape was not exactly the same. Even the jawline showed subtle changes. None of the differences were obvious. But together, they raised serious questions. Then investigators reviewed Daniel's fingerprint records. That discovery shocked everyone. Several fingerprint files were missing. Not misplaced. Missing. Someone had removed them. Ryan knew that was no accident. Prison records did not simply disappear. Someone had intentionally erased part of Daniel's history. But who? And why? The questions kept growing. That afternoon, Ryan visited Daniel's cell. The inmate sat quietly at his desk. A pen rested in his hand. A blank sheet of paper sat before him. Ryan closed the cell door behind him. "We need to talk." Daniel looked up calmly. "I figured you would." Ryan placed several photographs on the desk. "Who are you really?" For the first time in months, Daniel's smile disappeared. Only for a second. Then it returned. "I already told you who I am." Ryan leaned forward. "No, I don't think you did." The two men stared at each other. Neither spoke. The silence felt heavy. Finally, Daniel picked up his pen. "You've spent months asking the wrong questions." Ryan narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" Daniel tapped the blank paper. "You keep asking who I am." His smile returned. "When you should be asking who replaced me." Ryan felt a chill run through his body. Before he could respond, Daniel stood and walked toward the back of the cell. The interview was over. At least for now. That evening, investigators searched deeper into Daniel's past. They contacted former employers, former neighbors, former classmates. Most records seemed normal, until they located a retired sheriff named Walter Hayes. Walter had worked on Daniel's original arrest years earlier. When Ryan showed him a recent photograph of the inmate, Walter immediately frowned. "That's not him." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. "You're sure?" Walter nodded. "Absolutely." He pointed at the photo. "The man I arrested looked similar." He paused. "But this isn't the same person." The room fell silent. For months, investigators had suspected something was wrong. Now they had confirmation. Someone had entered prison pretending to be Daniel Brooks. But the mystery only deepened. Where was the real Daniel? And who was the man behind the fake identity? The next day, a major search began. Investigators reopened old case files, financial records, property records, phone records. Every lead was examined. Most went nowhere. Then an analyst discovered something unusual. Several years earlier, a small cabin had been purchased under a false name. The paperwork connected indirectly to Daniel's network. The cabin sat deep in a forest nearly 200 miles away. The location was isolated, quiet, easy to overlook. Ryan assembled a team immediately. The drive took hours. The road grew narrower as they approached. Trees surrounded the area. No nearby houses. No nearby businesses. Just wilderness. When officers finally reached the cabin, they found the front door unlocked. Everyone moved carefully. The building appeared abandoned. Dust covered the furniture. Spider webs filled the corners. Yet signs of recent activity remained. Someone had been there. And not long ago. The team searched every room. Inside a bedroom closet, officers discovered several boxes. The contents stunned them. Fake identification documents, maps, encrypted notes, photographs. Dozens of photographs. Many showed prisons. Others showed government buildings. Some showed people under surveillance. But one photograph captured everyone's attention. It showed the real Daniel Brooks. The photo had been taken recently. Very recently. The timestamp was only 6 weeks old. Ryan stared at it in disbelief. The real Daniel was alive. At least he had been 6 weeks earlier. That changed everything. The investigation had officially become a hunt. A hunt for the real Daniel. As officers continued searching the cabin, another discovery emerged. Hidden beneath loose floorboards was a metal lockbox. Inside were journals filled with coded writing. Investigators carefully packed everything for analysis. Then one officer called out from another room. "Detective, you need to see this." Ryan hurried over. The officer held a small notebook. Its pages contained names. Lots of names. Some belonged to criminals already under investigation. Others belonged to ordinary citizens. But several names made Ryan's blood run cold. They belonged to prison employees. Not one employee. Not two. More than a dozen. The conspiracy inside Blackstone Prison was far larger than anyone imagined. Ryan immediately contacted headquarters. Arrests would need to be made. Interviews conducted. Evidence secured. The operation was expanding rapidly. For the first time, investigators felt they were finally gaining control. But that feeling lasted only a few hours. Late that night, analysts began decoding the journals found in the cabin. Most contained instructions, schedules, meeting locations. Nothing unexpected. Then they reached the final journal. And everything changed. Inside was a message apparently written by the man pretending to be Daniel Brooks. The message described a backup plan. A contingency plan. Something designed to activate if the prison operation was ever discovered. Ryan listened as the analyst read the decoded text aloud. The room grew quieter with every sentence. Then the analyst reached the final line. Her voice trembled. Detective. Ryan looked up. What is it? She swallowed hard. The plan activates when investigators uncover the false identity. Ryan's stomach dropped. That's today. The analyst nodded. Then she read the last sentence. The replacement's removal begins immediately. The room went silent. Ryan's eyes widened. He grabbed his phone and called Blackstone Prison. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Then another line finally connected. A frightened officer picked up. The sounds of alarms echoed loudly in the background. Detective. What happened? Ryan shouted. The officer's voice shook. It's him. Who? The officer struggled to answer. Then the words finally came out. The inmate in cell 214 is gone. And this time, the prison cameras showed exactly how it happened. The impossible prisoner had escaped right in front of them. The alarm sirens screamed through Blackstone Prison. Detective Ryan Carter gripped the phone tightly. For several seconds, he could not speak. The inmate known as Daniel Brooks had escaped. Not disappeared. Not vanished mysteriously. Escaped. And prison cameras had recorded the entire thing. Ryan immediately demanded the footage. Minutes later, investigators gathered around a monitor. The video began playing. Cell 214 appeared on screen. The inmate sat quietly on his bunk. Nothing unusual happened for nearly 10 minutes. Then a prison maintenance worker approached the cell. The worker carried a toolbox. He unlocked a service panel beside the cell. At first, it looked like routine maintenance. But then the worker entered a hidden utility corridor located behind several cells. A few moments later, the back wall of Daniel's cell quietly opened. The inmate stepped through. The wall closed behind him. And both men disappeared into the corridor. The room fell silent. The escape had been planned carefully. It was not an impulsive act. It was the final stage of a long operation. Ryan immediately recognized the maintenance worker. His name appeared in the notebook found at the cabin. He was one of the prison employees connected to the conspiracy. Within hours, authorities arrested several prison workers. Some confessed quickly. Others denied everything. But the evidence was overwhelming. The secret network inside Blackstone Prison had existed for years. Corrupt employees had helped move information, money, and coded messages through the prison system. And at the center of it all was the man pretending to be Daniel Brooks. The nationwide search began immediately. State police, federal agents, local investigators. Everyone joined the hunt. Meanwhile, analysts continued decoding the journals from the cabin. The journals finally revealed the complete truth. Years earlier, a criminal organization had created a communication network that operated from inside prisons. The network used coded letters because ordinary mail attracted little attention. The messages appeared harmless. Family stories, daily routines, simple conversations. But hidden inside were instructions, locations, schedules, warnings. The letters allowed criminals outside prison to coordinate fraud schemes, theft operations, and financial crimes without attracting suspicion. The fake Daniel Brooks had volunteered to enter prison under a stolen identity because prison made him appear harmless. No one expected the mastermind to be sitting behind bars. It was the perfect hiding place. But there was still one unanswered question. Where was the real Daniel Brooks? 3 days later, investigators finally received the answer. A small-town sheriff's office reported a possible sighting. An older man had checked into a roadside motel. He appeared nervous. He seemed frightened. And he had used a fake name. When investigators showed his photograph to people connected to the case, several immediately recognized him. The man was the real Daniel Brooks. Ryan flew there immediately. When he arrived, Daniel agreed to talk. The interview lasted hours. His story shocked everyone. Years earlier, members of the criminal organization had approached him. They needed someone whose identity could be used. At first, Daniel cooperated. But when he realized how large the operation had become, he tried to leave. The organization refused. They took his identity, created false records, and eventually replaced him with another man who entered prison under Daniel's name. Fearing for his life, the real Daniel disappeared and spent years hiding, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere for long, always looking over his shoulder. His testimony filled in the final gaps. Now investigators knew exactly how the scheme had worked. But one target remained: the fake Daniel Brooks, the mastermind, the man who had escaped Blackstone prison. The search continued for weeks, then months. Several leads failed. Several sightings proved false. The case dominated headlines across the country. Many people wondered whether he would ever be found. Then a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A postal inspector reviewing old evidence noticed a detail hidden within one of the earliest coded letters. The clue had been overlooked for years. When combined with information from the journals, it pointed toward a small coastal town in Oregon. Authorities moved quickly. Surveillance teams arrived quietly. For several days, they watched. Then one evening, they spotted him. Older, with a different hairstyle, using another false identity. But it was him, the man known as the fake Daniel Brooks. Officers followed carefully. They wanted to avoid mistakes. Finally, as he exited a small grocery store, investigators moved in. The arrest happened peacefully. No chase. No drama. Just years of deception finally coming to an end. When Ryan later questioned him, the man eventually admitted the truth. He had built the coded letter system. He had recruited prison employees. He had organized the network. And he had spent years believing nobody would ever uncover it. What surprised him most was not the investigation. It was the person who started it. Officer Mark Jensen. A guard who simply became curious about a few lightly circled words. That small observation eventually exposed an entire criminal operation. Months later, Blackstone Prison looked very different. New security measures were installed. Mail procedures were redesigned. Several corrupt employees were removed. The hidden corridors were sealed. The prison slowly returned to normal. One afternoon, Ryan stood in the prison mailroom. Stacks of ordinary letters sat waiting for inspection. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Just letters. As he prepared to leave, Mark Jensen walked in. The two men exchanged a smile. "Hard to believe it started with a few circled words," Mark said. Ryan nodded. Sometimes the biggest secrets hide inside the smallest details. The investigation officially closed later that year. Dozens of crimes were solved. Stolen money was recovered. Members of the criminal network were arrested. And the mystery of the inmate who kept writing letters was finally explained. For years, those letters had traveled quietly through the mail system. Most people saw harmless messages, simple stories, ordinary words. But hidden beneath the ink was an entire criminal operation. A secret that stayed buried until one person looked a little closer. And when police finally realized the truth, everything changed. The letters had never been about staying in touch with family. They had been the control center of a criminal empire operating from behind prison walls. And that empire fell because someone noticed what everyone else ignored.